Hi everyone, my name is Matt and welcome to my channel. It's been a while since we worked on the Tomb King's army. I've been wanting to revisit the army project, and this Necrosphinx was sitting in my pile of shame waiting for some paint. With a few tricks and some contrast paint, we can make it look pretty good in a short amount of time. Then we'll take it a step further with some extra detail and highlights if you want to spend more time on it. We'll also have some recipe cards to go along with this video, and you can download them and print them out. Details about how to get them will be down in the description below. Now let's grab our brushes and get started. After assembling the model, I undercoated it with gray primer, but any other light colored primer should work fine. I think it'll be easier to paint the arms separately, so I drilled holes and glued pieces of wire and attached them to corks for easier handling. I began by airbrushing the model with Runelord brass. You could just as easily paint it with a regular brush, but the airbrush will save a lot of time. I'm not worried about overspray or getting any brass on the other areas of the model, since I'll be using opaque paint for everything else. I like to thin the paint with a small amount of water and spray 2 or 3 thin layers for a bright, even finish. With the Runelord brass base coat done, next I dry brushed all the metal areas with Stormhost silver. I like to use cheap craft brushes for dry brushing. There are a lot of specialty brushes out there too, and you could use those if you prefer. Next I painted over all the metal with Aggaros Dunes contrast paint. This is going to bring a nice yellow tone to the brass. Normally when I work with contrast paints, I like to use a lot of paint, but this time I'm using less because I want to avoid pooling. Rather than flood the model with paint, I'm putting down just enough to tint the metal, like a glaze or a stain. I'll take care of the shading part later. Right now I'm just concerned about getting a nice yellow-brown tone. Next I shaded the metal with Targor Rage Shade. On some areas I painted the shade directly into the recesses. On other areas I painted more of the shade and allowed it to pool. I'd like to have a variety of tones on the model. I figure that it's pretty old and tarnished, and it probably wouldn't weather evenly. I'd like to add some oxidation to the metal. I decided to paint this as brass rather than gold. Gold doesn't oxidize, but brass does, and I like having the opportunity to add some extra color to a model. I thinned some turquoise paint with water, about 3 parts water to 1 part paint, and with barely any paint on the brush, I started building up layers of glazes. Since this is thinned with water only, any paint that pools will leave marks commonly called coffee stains or tide marks. Make sure there's barely any paint on your brush and don't allow the paint to pool on the model. If it pools or runs into the crevices, it means your brush is overloaded, and you'll want to wipe the brush off and soak up the excess paint on the model. The less paint you have on your brush, the more control you have over it. Direct it exactly where you want it to go. I like to build up the oxidation in some areas more than others to make the surface more interesting. Just be careful not to overdo it. You can always add more if you want to, but if you add too much, it's difficult to remove. Now it's time for the main body of the Sphinx, and I'd like to paint it as a kind of bluish-black marble. I started off by painting everything with the Fang gray. Any medium or dark gray would work fine. I chose this color because it's pretty opaque, and I can get away with just 1 or 2 coats for a solid finish, and that'll help save me some time. It doesn't have to be a perfectly smooth finish, so don't stress about it too much. Next I added a streaky marble effect with Ahriman blue paint, thinned with a small amount of water. I'm using an older number 1 brush for this, and I'm just painting some random marks all over the model. Try to avoid getting any paint on the brass sections if you can. Once the paint dries, you can go back and add some finer lines, and brighten up some areas. The streakier looking this is, the better. Now is a great time for me to ask you to do those YouTube things that we all love so much. If you're liking the video so far, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future content. If you really like what I'm doing here and want to support the channel further, please consider Patreon or a YouTube channel membership. We have some perks including a Discord server, printer-friendly PDF files of our new recipe cards, and early access to videos. With the streaky base coat done, now it's time to darken everything with Black Templar, and I'm going to apply the paint in a couple different ways. This paint is straight out of the pot and I didn't dilute it with anything. Working on one section at a time, I painted a thin layer of Black Templar, then I quickly rinsed the brush, dried it off on a paper towel, and used the clean brush to wipe away a little bit of paint here and there. I'm not wiping away any areas in particular. They're mostly random, and maybe wiping away a little more in some spots and less in others. After that first layer dried, I went back with a sharp brush and added a few dark lines of Black Templar. It's going to show up better on the areas where more paint was wiped away, so I'm focusing the lines there. Vary the length and width of the lines, and use the streaky layers underneath to help guide where you place the lines. Do your best to keep the brass clean, but some black paint is bound to spill on it. That's okay, it'll be easy to touch it up later. The Black Templar layer made a huge difference and the model is really coming together now. For any brass areas that need to be touched up, I made a mix of about equal parts Stormhost silver and Retributor armor. I also used this mix to paint the claws. I decided to paint the claws now because if I painted them earlier, I figured it would be difficult to avoid them while painting the rest of the feet. I think painting it in this order ends up being easier and faster. After the base coat dried, I shaded the claws with Aggaros Dunes, followed by Targor Rage Shade, and then I added some oxidation with Ahriman Blue. There are a ton of tiny details all over the model, and you could paint as many or as few of them as you like. I don't want the model to look too busy, so I'm not going to paint everything, but I think painting a few things would help add more visual interest. There are a few bones on the model, and I base coated those with gray number 8 from my custom grayscale, and you can learn how to mix your own set in this video here. If you don't feel like mixing anything, you could use white or any light off-white color. Then I shaded the bones with my custom Tomb King's shade mix, and if you haven't seen my video about painting skeleton warriors, you can watch it here. This mix is equal parts skeleton horde, Nuln Oil, and contrast medium. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Aggaros Earthshade is pretty close. The bones have some wrapping on them, and I base coated that with gray number 2 from my custom grayscale. If you don't feel like mixing anything, Eshin Gray is close. Then I shaded the wrapping with Black Templar. While I had the Black Templar on my palette, I painted a thin line around the remaining details. It's not completely necessary, but it'll help add extra definition to the model, and I think it's worth it. Next I painted a few of the scarabs and icons with Ahriman blue, and I made sure to leave a narrow black outline around them. Then I shaded the turquoise with Coelia green shade. I decided to paint some of the decorative parts of the armor with blue and red. I think it's easier to just paint everything one color first, and then pick out the other color afterwards. I painted everything with Kantor blue, leaving a narrow black outline where it meets up against the brass. Next I painted every other shape with Khorne red, and I left a narrow outline of blue around each one. This part can be a little time consuming. If you want to save time, you could just paint them all one color instead of two, or you could even paint them gold or brass. Then I shaded both the red and blue shapes with Targor Rage shade. At this stage, you could glue the arms on the model and call it finished, but I'd like to add some more detail and highlights, so let's keep going. The scorpion stinger on the tail has a gemstone, and I'd like to paint it a poison green color. For that I'm using a mix of Warpstone Glow and Moon Yellow from Vallejo Game Color. Warpstone Glow isn't a very strong color on its own, but with a little bit of Moon Yellow mixed in, it becomes a lot more opaque. I painted about 3 thin layers for a solid, even finish. I'd like to have the bottom portion of the gem blend to yellow. I added some more yellow to the mix and painted a crescent shape along the bottom. I'm not worried about the blend at this stage. I just want to get a solid, smooth finish on the crescent shape first. Then I added some water to the same yellow mix, and with barely any paint on the brush, I painted some glazes along the edge. There should be barely any paint going on the model, and it should dry quickly. Notice how the base coat shows through slightly. Build up a few layers, one after another, and work progressively towards the edge of the crescent shape. After a few layers, you should have a blended effect. Then I shaded the top of the gem with glazes of Warpstone Glow. Next I added some more Moon Yellow and painted a narrow line all around the edges of the gem. The line is a little wider near the bottom and narrower near the top. Then I highlighted one more time with Toxic Yellow. I kept these highlights reserved for the very bottom and on the corners. Finally, I added a few reflective dots with white. Next I highlighted the turquoise scarabs with Ahriman blue. Then I highlighted the edges with an equal parts mix of Baharroth blue and Ahriman blue. Let's highlight the blue gems next with Caledor Sky. I painted a very narrow highlight on all the edges. Then I painted an even sharper highlight with Baharroth blue. It's important to use a good brush with a very fine tip for this kind of work. This is a Series 33 Kolinsky sable brush from Rosemary and Co, and I highly recommend their brushes. If you'd like to buy some and help support the channel at the same time, I have an affiliate link down in the video description. Next, I highlighted the red gems in the same manner, starting with a narrow edge highlight of Evil Sunz Scarlet. I highlighted the red gems one more time with a very sharp highlight of Fire Dragon. I highlighted the bones next with pure white on the edges. Next, I highlighted the wrappings with gray number 4 from my custom grayscale. And if you don't feel like mixing anything, Dawnstone is a close match. I'd like to add some sharp reflective highlights on the marble. I painted a very narrow line of Ahriman blue on the sharpest edges and corners. I like making the line tapered at the ends as well. I think it makes for a cleaner looking line. Next, I painted an even sharper line of gray sear within the turquoise line. Then I painted a few dots of white here and there. I think it's easy to overdo this step, so I'm trying to be selective about where I paint them. I mostly concentrated on the upper facing edges and sharpest points. Next, I painted an edge highlight on the brass with Stormhost silver and a very sharp brush. This step ended up taking a really long time, so I'd recommend painting it this way if you have enough time to dedicate. Otherwise, I think dry brushing would still look great and take a fraction of the time. I used an old brush to apply a generous layer of wood glue to the top of the base. Then I applied a few pieces of cork, some coarse gravel, and fine sand. After the glue dried, I painted the base with a layer of thinned Rhine oxide, followed by a very heavy dry brush of Balor brown, and then a dry brush of Bonewhite. I painted the rocks with a dark gray, shaded them with a mix of Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil, and then dry brushed them with a medium gray. I painted the edge of the base black, and after that dried, I applied a few patches of static grass with superglue. Then I attached the arms with superglue. I'd like to give a big shout out to our supporters here on YouTube and now on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. It really is a huge help. If you want to be like these amazing people and help support what I'm doing here, just click the join button down below or follow the Patreon link in the video description. Thank you. Painting this model took me a lot longer than I expected. I think the gemstones took the longest to paint. I really underestimated how many are on the model. I'm glad that it's done though, and now my army has a centerpiece. If I paint another one, I'll definitely have to do more dry brushing. Has a project ever turned out differently or taken a lot longer than you expected? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy painting.